So in early 2026, a tiny 30-mile stretch of water basically brought the entire $100 trillion global economy to its knees.
Yeah, and in under 8 weeks, too, which is just wild.
It really is. I mean, it completely defies the traditional logic of geopolitics, right?
Right.
Because we are all sort of conditioned to think that the physical footprint of a war, like, determines the size of its economic blast radius.
Right, like if the fighting is localized, the financial fallout should be localized.
Exactly. But when you look at the raw data governing our modern supply chains, you realize that the global economy operates way more like this highly conductive, invisible electrical grid.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and like a single well-placed spark can blow out transformers on the complete opposite side of the planet before anyone even realizes the fuse was lit.
It is a really profound structural reality, and honestly, it's one that most people don't fully grasp until, the shock reaches their own bank accounts.
Aye.
The architecture of global trade is incredibly efficient, but that exact efficiency is what makes it exquisitely vulnerable to these localized traumas.
Well, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you. Today, our mission is to really map out this hidden economic wiring. We want to understand exactly how regional flashpoints can just instantly mutate into these global financial crises.
And we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We are synthesizing a massive stack of materials today, including geopolitical research briefs, historical economic data, military spending trend sheets from SIPRI, and the absolute latest World Economic Outlook updates from the IMF.
Yeah, it's a super comprehensive data set. It spans over a century of global conflict and financial responses, but it also gives us this real-time diagnostic of exactly where we stand today.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the core paradox we're looking at is just completely fascinating and, frankly, a little unnerving.
No, definitely unnerving.
Right. Because the public really tends to treat wars as these contained, geographically isolated tragedies. But the data we are analyzing today absolutely proves that modern wars do not observe borders when it comes to economic transmission.
No, they don't. The contagion is immediate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It dictates the price of your groceries, the interest rate on your mortgage. I mean, no matter how far away you live from the actual fighting.
And we have a stark, real-time case study for this. The events of early 2026 give us this exact anatomical breakdown of how a regional shock instantly paralyzes the global system.
Yeah, so let's get right into the facts. February 28th, 2026. This is the start of Operation Epic Fury. And just as a quick note, we are impartially reporting the events here strictly as factual data from our sources. We're not taking any political sides regarding the U.S., Israel, Iran, or China. We're just following the economic data.
Right, purely looking at the mechanics of the shockwave.
Right, so the data shows U.S. and Israeli strikes resulting in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in the very opening hour of the conflict.
And the response was extremely rapid. Within hours, Iran retaliated.
All right, launching missiles and drones.
Yeah.
But the critical data point here, the exact moment the global economic grid just short-circuited, was when Iran restricted maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is the concept of a geographical choke point.
Yeah.
When we look at the maritime intelligence data from Kepler, the drop-off in shipping traffic wasn't this gradual decline. It was an absolute cliff.
A total wall.
Exactly. Before the war, you had roughly 130 vessels navigating that strait every single day.
Okay.
By July 2026, that volume had collapsed down to just 41 vessels a day.
Oh, wow. That's a nearly 70% decline.
Yeah, a massive evaporation of traffic.
I mean, it's basically the equivalent of shutting down a major metropolitan highway right at rush hour, but on a planetary scale.
That's exactly what it is.
But wait, let me push back a little here. Wars happen around the world all the time, right?
Yeah.
And they don't crash the global economy. Why does this specific narrow strip of water matter so much?
Well, it comes down to what that specific strip of water normally carries. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a convenient shortcut. Under normal circumstances, it handles about 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption.
20%.
Yeah, and a full quarter of all seaborne traded oil. So it's not about the physical size of the war, it's entirely about what the war is touching.
Right, because there's no backup plan, is there?
No, there really isn't. You don't have viable pipeline alternatives to just magically reroute that volume of crude out of the Persian Gulf. So if the strait is restricted, the global energy supply is just instantly crippled.
So it's literally putting a tourniquet on the global economy's carotid artery.
Exactly.
Because, like, you could have a sprawling land war in a region without major supply lines, and the economic ripple is somewhat muted. But a localized, targeted conflict on this 30-mile bottleneck instantly deprives the planet of its baseline energy supply.
And the transmission from that maritime bottleneck to your hometown is brutally fast. The IMF data maps this out perfectly.
Yeah, within just 8 weeks, the ripple hit the U.S. consumer directly. We saw gas prices climb right above $4 a gallon.
Which is an immediate hit to every household budget.
Exactly. But it's the institutional panic in these sources that really jumps out at me. Like, the IMF had to revise global headline inflation upward for a third consecutive time, pegging it at 4.7%.
Yeah, and you had major financial players sounding the alarm, too.
Right. Citadel's CEO, Ken Griffin, he was publicly warning that a 6 to 12-month closure would make a global recession unavoidable.
And it wasn't just finance, guys. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, issued this really sobering caution. He said that even if the strait reopened immediately, the damage was already done.
Right, because the delay is already baked in.
Exactly. He warned that the disruption would still shave 0.3 of a percentage point off global growth no matter what, because physical supply chains just take months to heal. When you strand vessels and you're forced to reroute fleets around entire continents, logistics at the ports back up massively.
Right, you can't just flip a switch and put all the cargo ships back where they belong.
Exactly. The physical assets are in the wrong place, and it takes a long time to fix that.
And the real-world ripple effect went so far beyond just crude oil, too. The sources show severe disruptions in fertilizer and liquefied natural gas shipments.
Which is huge.
Yeah, because European airlines had to cancel thousands of flights due to jet fuel costs. And it hit developing nations even harder. The Philippines was forced to declare an energy emergency.
Yeah, that part was striking.
And Pakistan, they literally had to close their schools for 2 weeks just to conserve fuel. Just think about that. A geopolitical conflict in the Gulf dictated whether kids in South Asia could go to school.
It's incredible how fast the contagion spreads.
So what does this all mean? Like, when I see these massive shocks, I always wonder, is this just a temporary blip? Can central banks just step in, tweak interest rates, and fix it?
Well, that's the thing. That assumes central banks have the right tools for this kind of crisis. And they don't.
Wait, really? Not even the Federal Reserve?
Not even the Fed. See, central banks can raise or lower interest rates, which is great for managing demand. If everyone's buying too much and driving up prices, you raise rates, loans get expensive, and people stop buying as much.
Right, that cools down the economy.
Exactly. But the 2026 crisis wasn't about too much demand. It was a pure supply shock. And a central bank cannot print oil.
Oh, right. Jerome Powell can't materialize a shipment of fertilizer.
Exactly. Raising interest rates doesn't clear a maritime strait of military hazards, so these central banks were completely trapped. If they cut rates to help businesses survive the high energy costs, they risk making inflation even worse.
But if they raise rates to fight inflation, they crush businesses that are already struggling to keep the lights on.
Precisely. They're paralyzed because this type of supply shock inflation absolutely refuses to fall through monetary policy. For a household, that means you're stuck paying higher prices at the pump and pricier groceries, and the central banks are essentially powerless to help you.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you look at the historical data in these sources, you realize 2026 isn't some crazy anomaly.
No, it's actually part of a very clear pattern.
Right, it's proof of a century-old structural pattern. It's always this regional trigger hitting a choke point and shocking the globe. Like, let's go back to July 1914.
A perfect example.
Right, a single assassination in Sarajevo, a localized political crisis. But within 5 weeks, almost every major stock exchange on Earth was forced to close.
Yeah, the contagion was absolute.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary, William Mercado, he had to shut down the New York Stock Exchange for 4 entire months just to stop the bleeding. And the London Stock Exchange stayed closed for 5 months.
And the reason for that ties right back to our chokepoint concept. In 1914, the chokepoint was international finance, specifically the gold standard.
Okay, how so?
While London was the central clearinghouse for global trade. When war fear spiked, European banks panicked and started hoarding physical gold. And back then, you actually had to physically move gold across the ocean to settle accounts.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just wire transfers.
No, literal ships carrying gold bullion. But with German U-boats in the water, shipping gold became too dangerous and basically uninsurable. So the physical transmission stopped, and the liquidity of the whole banking system just evaporated.
It's like tripping over a single power cord and accidentally bringing down an entire global data center.
That's a perfect analogy. Nobody in Sarajevo intended to crash global systems. The financial system did it to itself.
And 59 years later, the Yom Kippur War in 1973 did the exact same thing, but with oil.
Yep. The fighting lasted less than 3 weeks, but the economic shockwave lasted for years.
Because the resulting Arab OPEC oil embargo caused crude prices to nearly quadruple, right? From like $2.90 to $11.65 a barrel by January 1974.
Right, and that created stagflation, rising inflation, and rising unemployment, which economists previously thought was literally impossible.
But surely, I mean, the global economy is more resilient and decentralized today than it was in 1914 or 1973, isn't it?
You'd think so, but it's actually the opposite. As the global economy becomes more tightly wired and hyper-efficient, the dependencies on these singular choke points become more brittle, not less.
So we optimized for cost, but sacrificed resilience.
Exactly. We got rid of all the redundancies.
Which brings us to a massive kind of hidden variable in all this, the global military buildup. Because these economic shocks do not happen in a vacuum.
No, governments are very aware of this fragility.
Right. And if you look at the SIPRI data, global military spending hit a record $2.887 trillion in 2025. That's the 11th consecutive year of growth, up 41% over the past decade.
The scale of that spending is just massive.
It is. NATO's European members saw their spending rise 14% to $864 billion. That's their fastest one-year increase since 1953. And the U.S. Congress approved more than $1 trillion in defense spending for 2026 alone.
Which is a staggering reallocation of capital.
But it raises this chicken and egg question for me. Are we building these massive arsenals because we're terrified of these economic shocks? Or are the arsenals themselves making these global conflicts inevitable? It kind of feels like buying a massive insurance policy on a house while simultaneously storing fireworks in the basement.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows that governments are no longer treating these wars as outlier events. $1 trillion in defense spending signals that this level of conflict and the resulting economic disruption is being fully absorbed into the baseline assumptions of governments.
They're planning their next decade of budgets around it.
Exactly. They know the choke points are vulnerable, so they are arming up to protect those specific nodes.
So shifting our gaze forward, if the mechanism is always local shock plus global choke point, where is the next fuse waiting to be lit?
Well, analysts are tracking rising risk through 2026 in the Taiwan Strait.
Right, driven by internal pressure in China's military leadership and Beijing's approaching 2027 readiness target. Now, our sources point out that a full invasion is considered unlikely in the near term, but the systemic risk is still colossal.
It is, because we're looking at a completely different kind of choke point. In 1914, the choke point was finance. In 1973 and 2026, it was oil.
And for Taiwan, the transmission channel would be advanced semiconductors.
Right. Silicon.
Silicon is basically the new oil. And a disruption there wouldn't just mean paying more at the pump. It would mean an immediate freeze on the production of almost every car, smartphone, and cloud server on Earth.
The impact would be instantaneous across every major industry.
But if everyone knows the stakes are this high, doesn't that guarantee a sort of mutual deterrence? I mean, surely no one wants to crash their own economy.
This raises an important question, but we have to look at the history. Deterrence failed in 1914. It failed in 1973. And it failed in 2026.
Right, because logic doesn't always drive these decisions.
Exactly. The central lesson from all our sources remains the same. The physical size of a war no longer matters. What matters is solely whether that war touches a choke point the rest of the world relies on. If it does, the economic contagion will happen, regardless of the combatants' intentions.
And that brings this whole conversation right back to you listening to this today. Because whether you are managing a household budget in Ohio or you're running a shipping firm in Rotterdam, a distant war is no longer a distant problem.
No, it's immediately felt.
Right, it's felt in higher prices and stubborn inflation. 50 years from now, 2026 will be remembered exactly like 1973 is today, as the year a regional war completely rewired the global economy.
It really is a historical inflection point.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, really provocative thought drawn from the data. And it's something we haven't touched on yet.
Oh, the IMF growth projections.
Yes. So our sources note that the 2026 war is causing profound immediate damage, right? The IMF cut Middle East and North Africa growth to just 1.1%.
Right, and Iran's economy is contracting by 6.1%.
It's exactly. Up to $145 billion in their own war losses. The destruction is immense. Yet, despite all of this, the IMF projects global macroeconomic growth to actually recover to 3.4% in 2027.
Which is remarkably fast.
It is. So here's what I want you to mull over. Are highly wired global supply chains actually getting faster at absorbing these massive shocks?
Like routing around the damage?
Yeah. The initial blast of a choke point failure is absolutely brutal, as we've seen. But maybe, just maybe, the global economy's ability to heal and adapt is accelerating just as fast. It's definitely something to think about.
It's a fascinating question to end on.
Well, that's all for today's deep dive. Thanks for exploring the invisible wiring of our world with us.